So Joel, I'm going to start with you. You're first up. We're at an absolute inflection point right now. We've got studios sitting on decades of content, and we also have the pressure to lean into AI disruption. And you are perfectly situated in this space to really cover like technology shifts. We were just discussing this backstage, right? You've seen film to digital, hand-drawn animation to tablet. How does this AI moment compare to those technology shifts?
For me, it's easily just like another tool because I'm dating myself, but on The Simpsons, I remember when we hand-painted cells, we had to use film. I remember the transition, we were talking about HD, the transition to HD, tablets, having to draw on tablets from paper to tablets. This fits it. This is, to me, just like another moment where we're going to use technology to improve the workflow of our animation. But I went through that whole process. Like, I remember when, we were using, like, truly, this is like on the simplest form, using Cintiqs and tablets and styluses. Having our artists not use a pencil on a piece of paper was like the worst thing for them to ever do. It truly was like trying to pry pencils out of their hands. Now, if you were to look at any production from The Simpsons, The Family Guy, SpongeBob, you're not going to, like, we all evolved. Like, we just use digital technology. It's just part of our process. So it's just, I see AI and all the new tech as just another tool that we're going to be utilizing to make our workflow that much quicker and faster.
So is this history repeating with those different shifts to now, or is this more poignant in some way?
A little bit, but at the same time, I just feel like we're just constantly evolving, And by the way, like, for those people that aren't aware, like an episode of Bob's Burgers, it takes about 12 months to make one episode. People aren't aware of like how long it takes to make animation. That's like goes for The Simpsons, goes for Family Guy. It takes like 12 months to make one episode. We tend to do about 22 episodes a year. So it takes a lot of manpower. It takes a lot of time. So we need tools. Like, we need tools like Coactive, things like that to help expedite certain steps of the process. And keep in mind, not everything is generative. There's a lot of things that we do in animation that is more like bean counting kind of stuff, because we track every frame of drawing that we do in the process, but we do it manually. Somebody has to go through, sort through drawings to kind of annotate and find a lot of these things. I would love nothing more than like technology to speed that aspect up.
And Michael, I'm going to turn to you. You just recently left Universal Pictures, where you spent a decade leading technology and also the AI roadmap. Do you see any gap between AI hype and the realities of implementation?
I mean, that's a great question. We talk about creative palette. Feature films always are the highest of high bar in terms of the art of possible, in visuals. You look at these big cinematic experiences, which is a perfect alchemy of essentially every art form. There's photography, there's cinematography, music, score, acting, costume, set design, that all sort of comes together in a sort of perfect alchemy of creativity that in its best art form creates a 2-hour-ish experience that we remember literally for the rest of our lives. And when we talk about AI tools in the context of making things faster or better or cheaper in that sort of pure context, it's sort of the wrong way to think about it, I think, in terms of sort of the cinematic art. It's really about pushing the art forward, enabling creatives with a broader palette of what they can do, and really sort of that highest of high quality bars is important. But I think a perspective in a lot of the industry, particularly amongst people who are incented to make things cheaper, is that AI will make things cheaper. But I think really the conversation is like, how can AI make things better? Back to just briefly about CGI. CGI budgets actually haven't come down over the last, call it 20 years. They've and then gone up a little bit because films just look more amazing. Audiences have an expectation that movies will look better and better and better and even more amazing. And it's probably all but certain you can make a mid-90s look movie for a fraction of the production budget it took in the mid-90s, but why would you do that? It's all about a cinematic experience.
Makes complete sense. And also, Cody, turning to you, your company, Coactive, solves a very specific problem that studios are facing. Can you unpack what that challenge is and what y'all are doing to solve for that?
Yeah, happy to. So when you think about Coactive and what we're fundamentally doing is that we're allowing companies to slice and dice their content like never before. Everything from finding like a specific moment, like, you know, Snoop Dogg being patriotic during the Olympics, to being able to actually take large swaths of content, finding environmentally conscious material so advertisers and brands can be associated and reinforce their brand values. And this comes up at every single part of the media supply chain and the production process as well. When you think about that kind of tedious process of having to manually go through, look at every single like moment and asset to enter in information, now because of AI, you can get that tedious work out of the way. You can find the assets that you need to be able to tell the most creative, the most pressing, and the most personal stories like never before. And we're here to ultimately give people superpowers, give them capabilities so that they can move faster, so that we democratize the creative process, leveraging AI in order to do that.
And just to reinforce what you're saying, I really like this also coming from music background, because specifically at Warner Music Group, we had a sync department. For those of you that don't know, sync is gonna put music into film and television commercials and gaming, right? But like the library by which a Warner Music Group would operate on is this much of the overall catalog. So something that could extrapolate out and look at the entire value, both from film and television and music, I think has exceptional value. So just leaning in on that, what is buried in these archives of content that you can really extrapolate the revenue from?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways to kind of extract value from this existing content. You know, everything from, for example, like I mentioned, finding like Snoop Dogg being patriotic, or, we were talking with the folks from The Price is Right and Family Feud, where they want to do kind of a veterans episode, finding those moments where someone appeared previously and bringing that in, to even thinking about, monetizing and being able to create, allowing advertisers and ad salespeople to create, very custom campaigns. Where when you think about it, when you think about like VOD, video on demand assets, large part from an advertiser perspective, they didn't know what they had. So everyone is scrambling to try to advertise, against the Super Bowl, when there's this massive long tail of content that's only getting heavier and heavier by the day as we increasingly do more personalization and we're increasingly lowering the barrier to create content. Now, all of a sudden, you can take that long tail of content and be able to monetize it by being able to find specific moments for a specific campaign. For example, thinking about the holidays coming up. You want to be able to advertise, like let's say you're Hershey, you want to do a Hershey Kisses campaign or Holiday Kisses campaign. Imagine being able to go through your entire VOD library, find all the moments that are relevant to that. That is where you can get to higher value, higher contextualization of your content so that you actually match it and have this interactive loop, being able to monetize in that way. And then also even being able to take existing assets and being able to slice and dice it for social media or to turn things into micro dramas and things like that. All of these things are now possible for you to do because you can go look through a massive amount of content, find those specific moments, and kind of remix content in ways that were never possible before.
For sure. Awesome. And also, speaking of monetization, Michael and Joel, I'm going to push it back to you because I feel like we're in this moment where there's a dual pressure, whether you're in television, you're in film, you're in music, right? On the one hand, you want to protect your content from being pushed into the training data of the LLMs so you can properly monetize it, right? But on the other side of the coin, we're all being, leaning into innovating with AI. So how do you think about that tension? Whoever wants to go first.
I can take a crack at it. It's a kind of a bit of an existential question. I think it's important as an industry to respect intellectual property rights. Without copyright protection and the ability to own IP and to monetize IP, there's not a way to sort of flow money eventually back to creators who actually create it, and sort of the flywheel starts to break down quickly. So I'm really 1,000% behind industry initiative to sort of make sure that IP sort of is monetized and copyright works with some reforms that are clearly needed. What I've been really spending a lot of time thinking about is, clearly clearly a lot of the industry is focused on making things faster, making things cheaper, making them cheaper, and maybe even faster, which is important to sort of make sure that there's economic viability to the world of filmmaking and television making. I think what's more interesting to me, a lot of the conversations in this community over the last couple of days, is what does AI enable us to do that we couldn't do before, either cost effectively or creativity that opens entirely new business models. Things like remixing content or crowdsourcing a story, or doing very rapid iteration on story development, so you can tell an amazing story that you might not have had the time to sort of figure out before. But I think really leaning into the art of possible in AI and new ways of telling stories, new ways of visualizations, wholly new experiences, and the economic model I think will come. But this sort of redactive save cost is important, but I think it misses the point.
But speaking of costs, this has been coming up too, because everybody wants things cheaper, but what I worry about, and maybe it's been discussed already on some of the other panels, but what we don't want is like a race to the bottom, and what happened unfortunately to the effects industry, where because people got faster, they started underbidding on projects because they would use tools to make it faster. But there's a point where competition, people kept underbidding, and then the price kept going down, and suddenly an industry starts to collapse because, like, people need to make money. My pitch would be, look, like, whatever, like, if I'm making an episode of animation for you, like, honestly, I don't want to reduce my costs. I mean, what I charge. I'd rather just charge what I charge. But if I can get it to you in 50%, like, that's the value, is that I can deliver it to you quicker. But like, I would want to hold my rate. I'm just being honest, because like it's gotta have a healthy industry. Like, I don't want to charge or like reduce my costs and not make money as a business. Like, there's got to be the right economics to have a to run a successful business in our industry. Because I worry, like, I hear from a lot of clients that it's like they have this idea. They don't even know how the tool and the production process works. Like, they're not quite sure how AI is going to be applied in something like animation, but they have this idea that it's a push of a button and then I can deliver their episode in like weeks or months, which is not the case. It still takes time to craft a good piece of content. And if the content is good, the value should be the same, in my opinion. I'm just going to try to deliver. My goal though is always to deliver it in a shorter amount of time. That's my point of view, because I worry, for those of you that have worked in the effects industry and remember how that went, like, we don't want to go down that road.
I think that's an interesting tension, because you're talking about keeping the cost similar for the value, right? But yeah. I'm sure you have some clients thinking, because you can now supposedly push a button and get a episode out, I'm using air quotes here, in whatever days they think can happen. So how do you toe the line of like using these incredible things, but making sure that the value and the price that you're charging still maintains the threshold?
In my industry, there are certain touch points when you're making an episode for like a streamer or for a network. So nobody wants like just to be delivered final frames. People want like a black and white storyboard to give notes on. And for some people, and what's funny, for some tech companies, some people look at me with weird eyes like, why would you want to use AI to deliver something that looks rough? Wouldn't you want something final? But they're missing the point, because we make a lot of creative decisions based off of rough storyboard elements. That's part of the creative decision-making process. And so as long as I can deliver to my clients the same touch points, and that's where I come from, is having done this for so long. It's like I know the touch points that the clients need, and in which case they're still getting the same things. They're just going to be getting it in a quicker amount of time. They're not going to have to wait as long in between. Just for animation, again, just to give you some idea, like just the animation part. And when I say animation, it's more the hand drawing part of an animated show. I know I told you it takes 12 months, roughly 12 to 15 months from writing to delivery, but just the physical animation part takes about 15 to 20 weeks, that in itself. That's a long time to wait for animation to be done. But that's where it's like, if all the clients would love to see the return, basically the return on their investment that much quicker, you know? It's a animation is a very labor intensive process. And I still think the value is the value. Like, I don't want to reduce the value of what we make,
For
you
sure.
know? Like, it's still worth what it's worth.
I was going to actually like riff on that. You know, I
Yeah.
think it's this iterative process. You know, when you think about creative work, it's being able to actually go create something, get to that rough draft first, get feedback, be able to socialize that. That helps you ultimately get to the best quality product. And being able to do that, get to that first draft faster, it just, you know, allows you to actually have kind of a higher quality bar and actually create things that deliver. Like I think about the production process where you have to like spend a tremendous amount of time creating a movie. Imagine if you can actually go start creating that movie, be able to get feedback by doing an ad about it or like market the thing, see what the signals on that piece of content's going to be on that movie before you end up spending like, $200 million to create a movie, and you find out in week one of the box office that, it was a flop. And being able to have those fast loops, getting that signal faster, I think just makes the process better and gets to higher quality output.
I agree. And I also think what you were saying is interesting because I think people forget that there is a human behind the AI. Like if you think about Geppetto and Pinocchio, like Geppetto had to exist for Pinocchio to do the dance. You know what I mean? So like, I think there's just some misunderstanding. Yeah. But I do want to get to you about the artistry question. We've heard a lot about this today. And in our first call, one of the most intriguing things you said was that you created this software platform for The Simpsons that they're literally using 30 years later.
Right.
Wild.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I used to work on The Simpsons back in the early 90s, and I built tools for myself to make me a better better at my job. And I recently been asked to consult on The Simpsons again, like 30 years later or so. And then my biggest surprise is that they're still using the software that I built back then. I would just, and they said their response, I appreciate it. They said, well, it works, and so like, why change it if it works? But at the same time, I'm like, since I programmed it, it's like I know where its flaws are, and there are many flaws. And so it was time for them to shift. And I like to say now they're shifting to more updated software. So that's like now going to be a thing of the past. But, everything evolves, to make the show better and make it to make the final product that much better, and that we don't waste time on making mistakes, So, and just to that one point about like the artistry of things, all the tools that I use that I've been testing, especially in my industry, they have been artist driven, a lot of it. What gets me excited about Coactive's tool though is a little bit different because it's a lot of hate to say it's the unsexy part, but it's sexy to me because it's like it really drives the production. There's a lot of data in moving animation forward that has always been done the long way, the longhand, by having a person do it. But the power in what Coactive can do has really increased the productivity of our data-driven industry in animation, And it's not art-based. There's so much, people get so focused on generative AI, but there's so many powerful tools that are more data-driven,
Which extrapolate the revenue. But I was actually going to ask you about this sort of bubbling anxiety in the creative community because that 30-year story made me realize that you're you've been in it as an OG animator for a long time, right? Yeah. So who better to ask, how do you feel about AI? Is it empowering creativity? Is it replacing? Is it a mix of those things? How do you feel?
It's definitely polarizing. I would say initially almost in the artist community, everybody you felt the negativity. There was just especially if people were posting things about AI on Facebook, every comment was negative. But where I find things changing, what's funny is, some of the most vocal artists are the ones that despise AI and they feel threatened by it. And what I'm finding now is that they're posting their own work again, but they're using AI tools to move it and to animate it, and then they're sharing it, and they're being blown away by what they're doing, and they can't help but acknowledge how amazing it is that they can upload a hand drawing or a still of their art, and now they're watching it move and animate and walk and dance, and then they follow up with another test and another test. And then I'm seeing other artists now do the same thing. So it's you could see it just like on social media, that it's the idea, the exploration, the testing, it's slowly like expanding by various artists, and there's the acceptance, maybe a little slow, but it is growing, and I'm seeing it in front of my eyes.
Well, and Michael, I wanted to turn to you because you've been pretty vocal about how you feel about AI as empowerment versus this whole idea of replacement. So what's a good concrete example of, from your background, AI really empowering the creative experience?
I think we're in early days. I came, my last job was, in the feature film industry, and I sort of said that, the quality bar is so high, we're not seeing final pixel, really any big way of generative AI. We're seeing a lot of it in early ideation, storyboarding, concepting, previs. Again, getting to the story, a compelling story, compelling visuals, and compelling physics quickly is a big move. But I think where we're really seeing some amazing innovation is in short form video. I mean, a handful of us were up in the Bay Area a couple weeks ago and judging an AI film hackathon where they had like 8 hours to create a short. And we went in with like very, very low expectations, like a bunch of Bay Area engineers, like what are they going to come up with? And it was just astonishing. They had 500 and something applicants. They whittled it down to 180-ish. In 8 hours, the video some of these people created was like that. The story was impressive. They were working through continuity issues. Visuals were really compelling. But more importantly, there were storytellers who had never told a story in visual form before. We're giving one of the one of the contestants some feedback. Oh, this continuity didn't look right. That the origami looked weird. And she said, well, that's the first project I've ever done. Well, keep going, don't stop. So I think there is sort of before our eyes a bit of democratization in creation that's happening. I think in time that creativity and ingenuity and new forms of storytelling will work its way up the chain into someday feature films. We'll get there. Long-winded answer, but that's...
No, that was a great one.
Yeah.
And also earlier we heard from the gentleman that helped produce the Coca-Cola holiday ad. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that we're in an era where people like to talk about the tools that are doing the storytelling versus the story itself. Do you, and this is really a question for anyone, do you feel like eventually like the how we got to the soup will be less important than the soup? Like we're in that period where everyone's like, so the AI did Santa's hand, and like, will it be invisible at some point?
I'll make one final point just because top of mind. I think at the end of the day, we're human beings that have emotion, we have empathy, we feel energy from each other. I can make eye contact with almost anybody in the audience and have sort of a silent conversation. At the end of the day, AI is a machine, and I think the uncanny valley isn't going to be crossed anytime soon. There's this like lizard brain in us that knows when we see something, is it real or it's not. So I think, again, I think the point of AI is a different palette of storytelling, a different palette of creativity, not sort of replacing what we know how to do today, because I don't think we can.
Well, I'm going to fast forward because you mentioned this earlier, AI as empowering new forms of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I love this. Specifically, in our earlier conversation, you mentioned perhaps having a new perspective of how to watch Shakespeare's Hamlet, very much giving Sleep No More, if anyone's seen that show. Mm-hmm. And also just building new forms of AI entertainment itself. So what is AI empowering in the storytelling department that we haven't had before?
I think it's honestly early days. I think there's a zeitgeist moment where we're going to discover how to take a story arc and have human beings experience that story in new ways. I mean, Fable Studios was up here earlier kind of talking about what they're working on, and some others in that space. And do believe there's going to be a zeitgeist moment where stories will be told differently, they'll be experienced differently, and the ability of AI with the right human touch to make it believable, to be understandable, to have emotional connection will be truly amazing. But I haven't seen it yet. I date myself. I spent hours and hours and hours playing that game Myst, back in the day on CD-ROMs. I think there's a next generation of that that's going to happen, but I don't know.
Well, and I actually was going to throw it to you, but it seems like you already have a comment.
Oh, well, yeah, I was going to kind of build on that. I think about, I had this experience this past weekend. So I'm dyslexic, which gives you a certain set of superpowers, being neurodivergent in that way. And for me, it used to be I struggled to express myself, especially in written form. But now, being able to actually write a blog post and being able to iterate, to talk with AI, to do that, to be able to actually iterate, you allow new people, new voices to come into the space. I mean, we saw this when we think about just getting global from a content perspective. Stories like K-pop Demon Hunter, coming out. Now, when I think about the fact that you can actually have and enable people that, didn't have the resources before to actually tell and talk about their point of view, I think that's amazing. I also think it's amazing that you can do super personalized stuff, imagine creating a rom-com of I love my girlfriend. Imagine I could create a custom rom-com of the story of how we met.
Yeah.
That's
you can do that.
You can do
I
that.
encourage that. Major cookie points. Just letting you know.
All right, noted. So I have some homework. Our anniversary is coming up.
Even better.
But these are the type of things that were not possible before, but are now able to be possible, and that you can actually have this flywheel where you can iterate, you can play with things, to actually get to quality and tell stories that weren't possible before.
I also wanted to go back to something Joel said, because I think we often in the creative community get caught into the sexy Gen AI stuff. But Cody, what your company does really well is address the ROI of things that studios are sitting on all of this, let's call it a pile of gold, but they can't actually get into the gold. And that's where you're sitting. Clearly CFOs love that kind of conversation. Sure. But tell us, why is this such an important conversation to be having in terms of extrapolating this revenue today?
There's so much opportunity out there, and it's a democratizing moment, which can actually enable new people to come into the mix, for new business models to come up, and for us to experiment, and ultimately to be able to drive sustainable impact, to have real impact, being able to actually figure out how do you monetize, how do you drive this ROI, so that you can continue doing it, So it's not like that MIT study of 95% of pilots fail. Thinking about that 5% and what actually makes that possible, that actually drives ROI and real value, that's going to be the lasting impact. That's going to be the stories that we keep telling and that we keep building on for, years to come.
Well, and just as our last question, Michael, because you were at Universal Pictures, I got to follow up on what Cody's saying here. You understand what studios have in terms of the content archives. So what, in practical terms, right, what revenue streams are being unlocked by being able to find and understand what's in your content library more easily?
I think there's broadly speaking two use cases. First is content that's airing, or content in exhibition, better understanding that content, better able to reach consumers either in a marketing perspective or importantly, an advertising perspective. I think contextual advertising is a long dormant idea that is sort of being rejuvenated with tools like Coactive. And the second one is really being able to better understand story, understand again, what's in the archive to create sequels, to create kind of next generation versions of the story. That's another great use case, but two big ones really, yeah.
So valuable.
Yeah. Oh, for sure, yeah.
Well, I want to thank Joel, Cody, and Michael for my entertainment AI brain has just been lit up, and I very much appreciate you. Please join me in thanking each one of our panelists. Thank you so much as well.
Thank you.